Story, one in which I'm finding out the more I'm reading, it's definitely a pretty good story. In a nutshell, this story shows how Russia basically was trying to undermine the United States back in the 1929s and show the United States even back then in the 1920s and 30s. They were showing the United States that what they were doing was wrong. They were trying to allegedly spearhead the Black Revolution. I mean, that's my take on this article, okay? But anyway, this is a guy named Robert Robinson. That's the small take on it. You can be the judge of yourself. If you don't know the story, you should check it out. His name is Robert Robinson. You can see it on your screen. He was finally allowed to return to the U.S. in 1986. He died in 1994. This is very interesting stuff here. If you don't know about your history, you'll never know where you're going. One of the unfortunate things about our history is that it's not either told to us properly or a lot of it has been erased. But in this case, this has been well documented. All right. So I'm reading this from an Ebony magazine from 1987. All right. This was 1 year after this man returned from Russia. And it sounds like he was in Russia in 1929. So, all right, I'm going to read. When it says black man, I'm going to replace it with melanin because melanin's no joke, and I like the term melanin these days. That's what I'm using. That's my style. Melanin, melanin. Check it out. Check it out. Check out. Check it out. That's all I'm saying. So instead of saying black, you'll hear me say melanin. Melanin man returns home after 47 years in Russia. Robert Robinson, I'm reading from an Ebony magazine from 1987, June of 1987. Black man returns home after 47 years in Russia. Robert Robinson was the first to defect in 1929. Now feels he was exploited by Simone Booker, Washington Bureau Chief. More than 50 years ago, Robert Robinson was lionized throughout the world as the Soviet Union's black worker hero. He was elected as the first black Moscow city councilman. All right. He was involved in the country's first racial employment grievance case. His image and record boosted the Depression era exodus of hundreds of black Americans, including workers, entertainers, intellectuals, supposedly seeking a better life under the communist system. Ever since the day in 1929 in Detroit when he was picked to work and teach in Russia, the only black among 600 Ford Motor Companies, all right, tool makers soared from the drudgery of a shop to the role of a celebrated, much traveled, global personality. I read this twice, it's still not a good flow, but I'm going to keep reading. Every act, speech, or deed he accomplished in the huge country was exploited. Okay. I was listening to this documentary on BBC to get off the article, and it said that he always had 5 men around him. All right, and they were exploiting everything he was doing. The Russians, all right, I'm going back to the article. The Russians concentrated their propaganda on bearing the cruel treatment of black Americans 2 decades before the Civil Rights Revolution. All right, so I would like to read that again. The magazine almost flew out my lap when I read it. The Russians concentrated their propaganda on bearing the cruel treatment of black Americans 2 decades, that's 20 years if you don't know, before the Civil Rights Revolution, okay? And setting Robinson apart as their example of equal opportunity. All right, so you would wonder what this whole thing is about. It really is we have a big play in this whole thing. All right, I'm going to read on. It says, The then 23-year-old machinist became a pioneer in the mechanization of Soviet industry during the Depression years when millions of U.S. blacks were unemployed. He earned wages double those of Detroit company workers, along with other benefits. On the surface, it was a gold-rimmed challenge. Today, nearly 80, Robinson, gray-haired and ever fearful of Russian KGB agents, is a lonely, forgotten man who has now surfaced in the nation's capital. He spent more than a half of his life trying to leave the Soviet Union for 27 years. He sought an exit visa only to be denied year after year. He never married, fearful that if he became attached to a Russian woman, he would not be able to leave the country with his wife and children. His escape, a spectacular, cunning, last-minute, desperate act, carried him to Africa's Uganda, to Jamaica, and then to the United States, where his entrance visa was a slip of paper. The mastermind of Robinson's return to the United States was veteran USIA official William Davidson, who over many years had visited Robinson in Moscow. Now, with all of the original black immigrants to the Soviet Union either dead or departed, Robinson remains the final link to one of the sorriest international scams ever perpetrated on black Americans, contending that his mistake was in giving up his American citizenship. Robinson said he had to confront the Russian beast, like millions of other Soviet citizens, in the struggle for food and housing. The easiest food to get was black bread. For almost 30 years, he endured the competition, likening the experience to being in a dungeon and having no rescuer. After several decades behind the Iron Curtain, Robinson connived to find an escape mechanism in a country of 250 million people where only about 20 descendants of the original black immigrants still lived. A typical example of Russian regard for blacks is the treatment of the great-great-granddaughter of noted Russian writer Alexander S. Pushkin, says Robinson. This is the 150th anniversary of the black author's death, but Kathy Pushkin lives in the city of Tallinn, 400 miles from Moscow, forbidden to travel. Robinson says that Soviets fear that she might meet, turn the pages here, marry an African and leave the country. Alright, so they're obviously, it sounds like they got another black lady 400 miles away in frickin' Wahoo land, okay? A lot of blacks who talked about the Soviet Union don't know a thing about the country, argues Robinson, a man well versed in communist tactics. They were fooled by false promises and delusions. He hopes someday to find a publisher for a book about his experiences and adventures and his role in being a leader of a mission to nowhere. Recalling his decision as 23-year-old worker to travel to the Soviet Union, Robinson now feels that he was used. He trained 42 workers. I'm going to say it again. He trained 42 workers at his ball bearing plant, at his ball-bearing plant who were promoted over him, who were promoted over him, who were promoted over him. He invented new machinery. He invented new machinery during his 44 years at the same plant, but was given no credit. And little bonus, he was elected to the Moscow City Council, but he never announced any candidacy. And his race was all a part of a grand propaganda effort. When he finally was able to leave the country, the only belongings he could take after almost a half a century of work were a batch of newspapers clippings and two medals, 4 photographs, and the clothing on his back. He was scared to death to travel halfway around the world to return American on a Soviet passport. For me, the greatest success was to get back home to America and right a wrong, Robinson says. The Soviet Union is not the answer for blacks. Alright, I guess I could have mentioned that to him. And that's the end of that article. It's enlightening, to say the least. I gotta say something. They got some really good pictures in here. I could go over some of the, some of the stuff, but I'll read one. It says, as an American defector, Robinson became an international celebrity. Above, he is interviewed by William Worthy, a black American journal, about the life in the Soviet Union. At left, of friends and neighbors raise a toast to Robinson at a party, making his 25th anniversary at the ball-bearing plant at which he worked. He worked 44 years in the same plant. Robinson returned to the U.S., took a circuitous route from Russia to Uganda, finally Jamaica. So shout out to Uganda, okay? Shout out to Uganda, the people in Uganda. Shout out to Jamaica, the people in Jamaica. All right. I couldn't imagine being in Russia for so long and not being able to be around my fellow brothers and sisters of melanin descent. I just couldn't. To me, to be honest, I mean, I'll put it like this. For that long period of time, to not even see one, I gotta be quite frank. I mean, I know that they had a few there, but I gotta be quite frank. To see like a bunch of us together, like a community, I would cry. And, I would have literally cried, because I know somewhat of the feeling because of my life and how sometimes I'm isolated from my own people. In other words, a token. Okay, so I got to tell you that listening to this story. First of all, there's nothing like being around people that are like-minded and people that look like you. That's number one. Number two, there's nothing like working with them and making money with them. Alright, that's number two. It's something that we are still trying to, well, a lot of us are starting to get. Alright, I'll put it like that. And it sounds like it is a story that got the best of him. And it is a tough story. However, the good thing about the story is to understand how Russia was trying to undermine the view of the United States and their relations to black people and relations to melanin people. That is definitely something that is definitely needs to be considered. We already live in a time where they're claiming that Russia has been trying to exploit us through the elections. Whatever, we really don't cover that much, and at this point I wouldn't doubt it, because history has a tend to repeat itself. So if you made it this far in this broadcast, I want to tell you I hope you have a great day. Godspeed be with you, and look forward to more videos. Love you guys, and please subscribe. That's the only thing I'm doing right now, promoting subscriptions.